All right, I'm good.
Good recording. Branden, or should I say Morpheus Jr. I uh,
Apt.
I just ruined the pleasure for everyone to try to figure out who does this guy look like. And by the way, I don't know if you noticed, I changed your name to that too.
Yep, yep.
So I'll uh I'll change that. I'll actually that's not right. Oh man, it is great though. I think I think it's a good way for me to have a bit of a nickname for you.
True.
Morpheus Jr. I want to be the. I want to reserve that right. Only James gets to call you Morpheus Jr. All right, so I wanted to meet with you because like a lot of a lot of people in the community, the toe community, are starting to get to know each other and everything. And you seem to be a really central part of the community, and you're sort of in the background all the time. And yeah, I kind of wanted to just interview you and try to get to know a little bit more about who you are, what your ideas are, how you like to contribute to the community, how you got to the community, like, really something general and light. But we can get as deep as you'd like. To give a little bit of context to people, I guess we could start with how we got to know each other. Do you want to start there?
Yeah. I think it was Daniel that posted a video that included your entry to the contest. I can't remember the precise name of it, but he included your work, or at least the video, in a link in the description. And I got curious and I clicked on yours. And then it was either through seeing the cover of your work being pretty similar to the cover of my book, or at least a previous iteration of a cover, and then I went browsing for your through your website, which at the time was a blog, and yeah, I looked deeper into the work you were trying to construct, and I was like, okay, yeah, I'm interested. I'm going to reach out to this guy. So I left a comment, and then you responded, and we were pretty much talking pretty much within the next couple of hours.
Yeah, so we've started working on some stuff already, you and I, but you really did some work with Daniel as well, right? Like you guys have been meeting quite a bit.
Uh,
And
it,
you've been speaking a lot in the Discord with quite a few others as well. Like, so I'm just curious, like, how are your relationships developing with the community so far?
my rather my relationship with the community is pretty. Uh, wouldn't say intimate. I wouldn't necessarily distant either. I do tend to lurk quite a bit in that community, but
Mm,
um, generally, though, I find the whole thing to be pretty curious, and a lot of my time is spent, free time that is spent, just reviewing what people are saying and
mm,
poking at them if I feel the need to do so.
mm. Interesting. Yeah, it's because you play a bit of a role of. It seems like you support a lot of people's ideas in different ways. But that's the question I wanted to kind of lead up to is, we had briefly discussed some of your own ideas and your own theories. And if I remember correctly, the first time we really spoke, that time we were, on a chat for like a couple of hours, you had discussed that you had some kind of theory or worldview that you had developed, and maybe even several of them, and you had brought them to completion in some way, and then you realized you could continue doing this forever in a way, and then you decided to contextualize that and actually create the kind of world that people would be able to interact with, which is what you're working on now. So could you explain a little bit more about like why it is you don't have a theory that you've really presented to the community yet, or that, I mean, you kind of do though, right? You have a website.
Yeah, it is able to be presented, right? And I have shared the book in that community before, and it seems some people have liked it or taken a peek at it before, but I tend to not, flaunt it around or anything like that because I believe that all theories are explicitly personal and implicitly personal as well. They are a means of grounding oneself in the world on account of information being told to the individual, not necessarily uh, connecting or making any sort of sense. It's like a means of unlearning and relearning everything that one is taken in, and to present it out into the public is, an act of some degree of courage, because if it is poked at a little bit too hard, it can be very destabilizing for people. Um, and I don't think I need other people poking at it, because I do that enough myself.
I see.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting reason. It's quite honest as well, and kind of unexpected, to be honest. Um, that's a that's a very good thing to know, because then it makes me wonder how many other people in this community have their own ideas and aren't really making it known. Like they are through debate and stuff a little bit, but they're not really presenting their whole theories, perhaps for the same reason you haven't really that much, haven't been vocal, either for that specific reason or just because it isn't finished yet and they're perfectionists or whatever. So, what do you think? Do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing? What are the costs? What are the benefits of doing that?
Hmm. Well, I think the good and the bad will be weighed on what exactly the goal is for the entire community. Where is everyone's goals orientated? Is I would say that a lot of it is mostly personal. I don't see much of a unified effort. I mean, there are some that are making active efforts to make it a unified effort to bring things together, like your unified theory is doing. Right, there are multiple attempts, but I lost my train of thought at the moment. But it's a another thing I wanted to add, actually, was that another reason I tend to not poke, not poke, but add too much about my own theory is that it becomes kind of dogmatic, and I have a very strong tendency to be dogmatic when it comes to it, which is, and from what I've noticed a lot of the time, whenever I speak deeply about my ideas, they tend to completely override other people's ideas. And it may be on account of my tendency to be dogmatic.
What do
And
you mean by override? Sorry.
it's like, whenever I get into it, I begin integrating what they're saying into my own vocabulary, and then I start correcting their terminology a little bit to make it fit my own a little bit better. And that I tend to not like too much, especially once I notice that I'm doing it. And it's like, just, let their ideas be. They will develop however they will. And it's best to leave them be in that sense. I'm not one to constantly uh, overhaul other people's ideas, more to just nudge them through questioning. And that's the approach that I prefer to take nowadays, especially since in the past I tend to overdo it when it came to explaining things.
Yeah, but that's interesting because so now we're getting into a little bit more, getting into the weeds, a little bit more of philosophical rabbit holes here. But I think it's an interesting direction to take it, because so far, it's almost 10 minutes into this interview and we don't know exactly what we're talking about. Anyone on the internet could be like, "What are they talking about?" It really
Yeah.
is specifically for people from the Theories of Everything channel that would understand this. But wouldn't that be how a unification theory would come about? Is one person trying to assimilate or make render everything compatible, no matter what the ideas are, or are there some ideas that are just so decoherent that there's nothing you can do with them? Because I had an interview with Lucy Waves, and her worldview, it's kind of amazing. She has a like in parallel, she has a lot of the ideas that this community deals with, and like kind of has integrated into their own theories. But at the same time, she makes an argument for like everything that anything it's like that anything that is possible to think of is in actuality real, and that can be couched in a framework of truth or of you know proof for a unification theory in a way. And so, you know, she makes the argument that anything that could be said, even logical contradictions, can be, and that's typically what my theory is about as well. Like anything can be rendered compatible, no matter how nonsensical. So I'm just curious, like, are there people that you couldn't assimilate into your system? And if so, can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I would say that I could integrate many peoples on account of the how do I describe it? It would be the what my um model tends to focus on is mostly psychology. And I do think that psychology in this context would be how precisely information moves and how it's digested and the like. And everyone has their own way of organizing this information or information in general, and they have a particular way of viewing the world. And in that sense, it's like if I see certain patterns in people's way of thinking and the way they're speaking and what they're referring to, I can easily slot them in. And then it's like, okay, so your theory is such and such and such. It's categorized and organized in this particular way, and you're viewing the world in these particular formats. And then there you go. It's pretty much integrated in a psychological sense, and which is also why I can resonate pretty deeply with what people are saying, because it's like, oh yeah, I recognize that pattern, and then I fit them in, and I move on.
Okay, so there's a bifurcation here. Really quickly, I want to know: do you have a name for your model? Because you mentioned the word model or theory. So, is there a name for it?
I have not put a name on it per
Mhm.
se. I mean, I've titled the book Metaforma, and I could describe its ideas to be metaformic, but
Okay.
I tend to not use that terminology. It's just my worldview, the way I organize information.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and so that the second part of that bifurcation was what you just mentioned. So I think that's really interesting because you're talking about recognizing patterns in the psyche of people and categorizing their worldviews based on psychology and pattern recognition, which is what everyone else is doing anyway, right? They're doing pattern recognition as well, but they're looking at it from different lenses, whether it's from physics, metaphysics, other levels. So that seems incredibly powerful, and it resonates with me in an axiomatic way that somehow, because unity theory, and it's not to make it about my theory at all, but it's just unity theory. For what I recognize is that it requires several types of theories, kind of like what you're talking about. Is there might be a requirement for several types of pattern recognitions, styles maybe, that can truly achieve a unified theory. Um, so this might be why you're in between things rather than forming an actual theory that has a framework. Do you agree or disagree?
It's kind of a yes and no. The way that information moves is, even beyond psychology, it would be how everything moves, because I do think that everything is information in the most fundamental sense possible. But uh, a lot of the difficulty that comes with figuring out how it's all structured is, well, being able to see it unfurl outside of my own head, right? It's like, yeah, I can look at nature and I can see how it all moves and the like, and I can strip down all of its elements and try to make out something of a logical argument for how it's all constructed. But it's not going to be anything else beyond that and pictorial images of what I think it all looks like and how it all fits together. In that sense, it's like, yeah, my book would be something of a construction of that sort, a modeling of what I think everything is, but it's also, in short, just observation.
Yeah, because I, it sounds to me like what you're doing is like going meta with modeling itself. So like instead of creating your own model, you're creating a model via other people's models. So like you're piggybacking on the psyche. So like the roots of people's pattern recognition sort of engine, which is the psyche,
Yep.
and noticing. That's why you said, your approach is psychology, and then you're trying to render coherence between these pattern recognition styles in a way. And so that piggyback effect is kind of, in a way, it sounds like it's pretty powerful, because then it's kind of like, standing on the shoulders of giants, or having everyone make the sundae and you just put the cherry on top, kind of thing, in a way. Do you agree with how I'm looking at it? Is that what you're?
Yeah, I mean it's pretty close. Yeah. A lot of my uh, discovery, not personal discovery and observation, mostly is uh, influenced, deeply influenced by other philosophers and people that I've talked to. And even my earliest work was innately, deeply psychological. And it tried to capture, in a very broad brushstroke sort of way, uh, people's general patterns and how they all behave. Yeah, and fitting it all together uh, was more or less easy enough. It was refinement that took a long time and a lot of effort, and yeah.
Interesting. So that's a leads me to asking something that, you might have insight into that people don't. And the question is, like, why do you think people feel the need to describe reality in these ways, these manners, to unify everything? Like, why do you think we have that sort of desire as a human species, and what makes us different, specifically the people, the individuals that are like consciously making this their work, like in this token?
Hmm. I would say the first aspect of it, which would be maybe the surface level aspect, would be that people don't like uncertainty. They like having answers and they like acting upon answers. It brings some degree of anxiety when someone doesn't know what is behind the veil, as it were, or what is beyond their personal set of things that are known, because what is known is ultimately what is structured and ordered, and what is not ordered is chaos, and then chaos invites itself to be ordered in the first place. So people go out into chaos to try and bring it back into order, uh, in that sort of sense. And the second thing would be that this desire to organize information, especially when it comes to theories of everything, in my framework, it would be called will dominance, or will primary function of sorts. And will is, I'll say, emotional, effective, and uh, deeply inclined towards desire, and specifically the interconnectivity of desires and bringing them all together into a holistic structure. They would look at connections, um, or rather, I should say, they would look at individual sets of information and then weave them together into intricate webs and then condense them as much as they can into something cohesive, something, and to also render any sort of connection that is between any two sets of information. For example, it's like they will look at maybe one person and another person, and this particular individual will notice the well, immediately notice just how connected the two are. They would notice that these two are connected in some way, but then they would immediately start branching out into other things that those two things are connected to. And then it'll just keep growing and growing and growing, and all of the expansions, or not expansion, all of the connections will continue to expand, and they will ultimately reach some form of totality on account of it continuing to branch off and off and off. And then they just go, okay, so based on what this person is right here, or rather these two people right here, and this great totality that we're all in right now, what is the simplest, cleanest connection from this small connection to every other connection possible ever? And they just remove all the barriers, and then boom, there you go. You have one connection tethered to everything.
Yeah, like
And
one mechanism that distributes itself throughout all the other connections. Now, you mentioned that the motivation to do this is something called will domain. Is that right?
will dominance. Yeah.
Will dominance. Sorry. So you said you were influenced earlier by a lot of philosophers. That sounds quite a lot, or strikingly similar to Nietzsche's will to power. Uh,
Yep.
or so, is it something like that? Yeah.
Similar. Nietzsche is an influence. A lot of the terms that I used are, definitely repurposed.
Yeah.
Will is, yeah, definitely desire in this context, and
Yeah.
will to power. I agree with Nietzsche with that being the main thing that people tend to want. I guess that's another topic, but
Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, yeah, because you're not even making that step. You're just saying will dominance, as in the fact that there's will to begin with, and then I think Nietzsche makes the step that okay, will to do what to accrue power, and here we're describing will to describe or to make connections or to know, which you could extrapolate from there and say, well, that is power in a way, but that just gets into these semantic sort of issues. Okay, so metaforma. Can you please explain a little bit more of like why you chose that title? It might give us some clarity into your book and into your whole theory.
Okay, metaforma, I believe. Well, I know that it means after form. As for the origins of each part of the word meta and forma, I think meta was Latin, and
Greek.
I believe there you go. You know better than I do. I cobble together words because I find them fitting. So yeah, metaforma. Metaforma is after form, and the moniker I tend to go off of in terms of branding is nexomorphic, and in terms of the meanings of that, nex would be slaughter or death in Latin, and morphe is Greek for morph or form. I believe I think it's specifically form, but together I intended the full word of nexomorphic to mean well, now at least, death of form, and combining these two things together, metaforma and nexomorphic, you have um, uh, death of form by, or no, after form by death of form, and that is a sort of a poetic construction of mine because it's true. The reason why metaforma was made is to try and totalize or bring together as much as I can about what is directly in front of me, about what I know, and what could be known about the world. I think, in the most general sense possible, right? And after form specifically references what happens after death. The death of form, after all, and yeah, it's uh, metaforma begins with mathematics and geometry, and then it starts weaving into physics, and then into biology, and then into um, a behavioralist psychological analysis of what a body or a form does, and then it goes into its psychology in the most abstract means possible. Then it comes out of the abstract and branches off into multiplicities of people, into societies and how they tend to behave and how they tend to communicate and what it means to um, communicate with another person, what it means to um, um, conjoin with people and give birth, et cetera, and how, in a political sort of sense, how it all tends to move and propagate in nature. And then it breaks down into how technology shapes the individual in a highly abstract sense. I don't get into detail because that is very complicated. And then it ends with the society, this constructed society, collapsing and breaching out into, or rather radiating out into, what is essentially eternity, into the afterlife. And then it loops all the way back around into geometry to tie it all together because I like my cyclical loops. But yep.
It's interesting. I had a lot of visuals while you were discussing that, and I see a lot of parallels with other people's theories, such as Daniel's spiralism or jumping continuity theory. Because you mentioned that you go from geometry to math to geometry to biology to, let's say, it's called psychology slash sociology,
Yep.
um, and then you lead back into, like, is it kind of like leading back from psychology towards biology, uh, geometry, and then, like, you kind of do that, like,
It
so you loop back around. So by looping back around, do you go back down through the levels? You know.
mm, I well, in a sense, yeah. When I was writing it, I recall that sort of train of thought.
Mhm.
Like it would be the psychological being the absolute core center of it all, and then it begins to branch out of into the societal, which is technically biology and the like, and then it goes back into the construct, which is supposed to be kind of like how the world is, which is the technological world, and then it reaches all the way back around into geometry. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, to talk about Daniel's JCT, he talks about levels as well, except he really goes a little bit more into finer detail, whereas he goes from mathematics to well, actually no, he starts straight from physics. So he goes from atoms and quarks, then atoms, then cells, then molecules, and so on. Well, I don't know if he includes molecules, but then biology and so on. But for him, I don't think he loops back down to anything. He just expands out into infinity and just tries to look or define the next level. And then Tyler Goldstein as well. He you mentioned how people can join, how they come together in a way. And Tyler Goldstein is a believer in marriage and having children, because that
Yeah.
is like literally the practical, blunt manifestation of the next level being created. Um, so that's interesting. And also, while you were discussing Metaforma, I was thinking about something that you said made me remember something that Michio Kaku said in one of his documentaries about how humanity is the first sort of level in a way that has like conscious control over evolution. So evolution is no longer semi-conscious or subconscious in a way. I wouldn't even, I don't know how we would contextualize the consciousness here, but the point is evolution seems to have been like more of a physics-based thing, like memes and environmental, circumstances is what leads to the evolution of beings. um, I guess they call it natural selection, right? So natural selection, but it seems to go from natural selection to conscious selection. So we can choose now how we want to evolve. What kind of bodies we want to have, what we want, what we can do with our environments, how we're going to spend our time in our mental worlds, and so on. So that seems to scramble things a little bit when it comes to these levels, because now, like, the next level is really just, it might just be what the consensus like what kind of emerges like consensus when humanity kind of gets together on the same page and says this is what we're doing. So I don't know, what do you think about that? Do you think that this is why we might all have a problem with our theories, or that we're missing this little sort of this little thing, or
Hmm. I don't know. I wouldn't say that it wouldn't be the main problem with the theories per se. It would be difficult to, actively have them all mesh together on account of us. being able to, or the individual being able to guide their own evolution of sorts, and creating a theory is definitely guiding one's own evolution in that sort of way. The way I could see it being a problem in that sense is that everyone would be, in my narrative that I'm currently creating, based on all of my own work, of course, it would be a battle of sovereignties, and every single individual would be a sovereign unto themselves. And on account of a rather individualistic society of sorts, it'll be a long-lasting endeavor, because everyone wants to, of course, exert their own power and to gather their own power, and making their own theory is essentially like making their own world of sorts. And they want their world to continue persisting, to have it be relevant, especially to themselves and perhaps to others too.
And yet,
And
the subject matter that people deal with when they make their theories is something we all share, which is why we agree on a lot of points. So this is a great segue into asking you about your project, because now it's starting to come into focus what it is that you're doing. If I'm correct, you're building a platform which is kind of like a game where people will be able to propagate these worlds that they want to persist. Is that right?
um, in a sense, yes. The way that the project is taking shape now is that I'm making one full world with a general set timeline. I have basic events as to what's going to happen. It's rather historical, apparently somewhat biblical, but there are 9 chapters, right? And every person will have the chance to explore 9 different chapters. And for every single chapter that progresses, the individual, the person that opts to be a part of it, will have the chance to, for every single chapter, have one character, um, witness a spiritual evolution of sorts. And that character, of course, one chapter begins, they begin their life, the chapter ends, that character dies, and is reincarnated into a new body in the second chapter. And that continues for 9. And for every single chapter that progresses forward, the world becomes increasingly fantastical, angelic, divine, eternal, etc., sacred. And that is the goal is to have dozens of people a part of this, to reflect a progression of humanity, becoming angelic and finally becoming divine in their own sort of way. Because all paths are not going to not necessarily be at the exact same point, but they would be a part of the total end, right? They would help make up the end of what everything would be, which is absolute and eternal, in that sort of way. And to try and bring it all back, it would be to encapsulate um, how the individual is, the one that guides their own fate, and um, they all have the capacity to achieve their own form of divinity in their own special sort of way.
It sounds to me a lot like you're creating a platform or a simulation that will enable people to simulate. So it's like a simulation of simulations, and ultimately that will lead to some kind of singularity. So now we're starting to ring a lot of bells in people's minds. Having said that, Ray Kurzweil comes to mind, um, Elon Musk, the Matrix, the Wachowski sisters now, I guess, and so like all this idea of there being um, not just that we are creating simulations, but we are simulated beings doing the same thing, and that perhaps the reason is to create purpose or to see what will happen, or maybe it's just the way things are. I don't know how you describe that, but can you contextualize what you're doing a little bit more in that broader view, and
Yeah,
compare it to how other people are sort of doing the same thing?
sure. I mean, I could say this. When it comes to the singularity, what I think it'll kind of look like is, and I believe I've mentioned it in the server at some point before, but it would be to have everybody realize that they are not only eternal, but uh, the absolute divine, God, if you will, um, acting through everyone, and everyone being the recipient of God's love. And to have everyone witness their own acts of love towards themselves, towards everybody from all perspectives, all at once, simultaneously. And it this particular project would be to maybe start steering you know uh, the general thoughts of people towards that particular angle to help them see that they can intentionally guide themselves in that direction if they so choose. But at the end of the day, I really do believe that it's something that's going to be inevitable anyway. So why not do it intentionally?
Okay, so I have one comment and one question.
Sure.
The comments first. Um, it sounds to me like that how like you mentioned how like the singularity will what it might look like. Now you've done a great good job of I think line like outlining what it could look like, what you're trying to create, and what it would look like through your method or platform.
Sure.
Um, but at the same time, I think it does apply to the singularity in a metaphorical way. And something came to my mind that perhaps we don't know what it will look like or what it will feel like, but we over time we seem to be getting increasingly aware of how it will happen, right? Like the internet, for example, as an engine, and then user-friendly platforms, social media platforms, that, and then the increasing sophistication of like what kind of communication we can have on these platforms and what we can do, and what kind of experiences we can share, and then now brain to computer interfacing coming online soon, perhaps able to transmit memories and real live experiences in real time and in perfect synchronicity with another human being, like really wild stuff. So we're starting to see more and more clearly how singularity might be happening, but as we know how, we maybe in perfect proportion we decreasingly see how, like, what it will feel like or what it will look like. I don't know. So that was just a comment and an idea. And then the question for you was, if I can remember it, I can't exactly remember it, but I do have another one, which is like, would you like, is this a video game? Like, was this how you're bringing this about? It's a video game.
I wouldn't say it's a video game. I did consider making it a game, but there was no way that that was going to be particularly feasible.
Yeah.
At least
So can
not
you
right
then,
now.
yeah. So I just want to know a little bit like what you're talking about. Like, it's a world that someone could create and so on. So like, how does that look like? Is that a, an analog thing? You obviously I think it's going to be something online, right? So it does strike me as a video game, but you don't want it to see it that way, right?
Yeah.
So,
Um, yeah, no, it'll all be hosted on a website, right? And my it will be used on my website in particular. It's basically going to be a very large timeline with a lot of illustrations, a lot of written poetry, and a lot of narration, and it'll go from beginning of the history to the end of the history. Um, and yeah, that's the basic format.
yeah, but how are people going to interact with it, right? Because from what
Right.
I've seen, that's what you have on your website already. But it's a story that someone experiences and goes through. So, but you want to make this interactive, from what I gather. Okay,
Yes.
so how will they interact with that?
The way the interaction occurs is by with every chapter that they want to be a part of. We get together. The call lasts for about 20 to 30 minutes, and they create their character, live out their entire life, and then they die.
Oh, so it's gonna be. I see. So it's not gonna be some kind of open world that people can participate. You're talking about like creating an actual story with people that you're gonna choose, and you're gonna see like how that can. Okay, that's interesting.
Yep.
And then your model could maybe be applied over and over again, or people can choose to
Yep.
do that. I
Exactly.
see. You're going to give people the ability to do that for themselves, I guess, and choose the people around them that they want to create a history with. Is that
Yep.
right?
Yeah. Pretty
That's
much.
interesting. That's interesting. So, say for example, I'm part of your world, and there's a chapter I want to take part in. Now, you know me. I'm a metaphysician. I like to start at the very, very beginning, and I go
Yeah.
with the most abstract. Although I do like seeing everything kind of emerge from that, and watching people and discuss the ideas with the more physical based stuff.
Yep.
Um, so let's say I want to be part of the very first chapter. How would I interact? How would I live out my life in that chapter?
All right. I don't know if I want to like go read off the basic script that I have, but you would go through a sort of character creation where you would pick out, well, since it's the first chapter, you would be placed in the Age of Order, which is when humanity is, well, a type of humanity has just begun to understand how they can start organizing things to make it be more efficient. And this is like ancient Rome sort of thing, or even before that. But that is when things will start, and then it'll go into the type of place that they will be born in, which is basically like, will they have a lack of comfort, which is a very common option, or will they have an abundance of love, or a lack of virtue in their general environment, and that's going to shape how they may, it'll affect their upbringing of sorts.
Mhm.
And then it'll go into the individual determining or picking which type of way they will choose to conduct themselves in this world, and it'll be based on the psychological archetypes that I've listed out. There are 9 different options, but I've broken it down into, okay, you pick one of 3 domains, and then based on the domain that you picked, will it be, which one of the 3 different types within that domain, and then like that, you're pretty much set to go. And I'll just basically be throwing you prompts back and forth. Or rather, I would prefer something like, "Oh, such and such happened to your character. What do you?" Or oh, and this will happen to them as well. Um, does so and so happen, or does this and this happen, or do you do something else? And then you decide whether or not you want to pick that, or do something more creative and exercise your own agency. And that continues on for, again, 20 to 30 minutes. And by the end of it, we'll have a story.
Interesting. So you're going to give people the parameters, and they can act within those parameters or try to go beyond them in some way.
Yep.
And then, okay, and so so it's just going to be a conversation, and then and you're going to create a story, and then eventually you're going to animate it, or
It'll be illustrated. I'll write out a poem / prose of the story, narrate it, and then they will have it.
interesting. So it's a simulation. You're going straight for people's minds and allowing the story to come about. Now that's very powerful, because so far that was my question from before. Yeah, you mentioned some very religious terminology, God, love, these kinds of things. So, and you're weaving this into storytelling, which is very powerful. I think we all know that humans operate in a story-based mode. Um, and at the same time, everything is starting to become a bit more clear about who you are and what you're doing, and at least what your position is in this community. You're very much on the practical end of things. It sounds like, right? Like, if we were to have a unified theory, or even getting to a unified theory might have to be a practical thing, like what you're doing, a system or a method to create worlds. So like I can imagine if this were to proliferate, and a lot of people were doing these stories, that over time a collection of stories could like maybe be fed into an algorithm or a computer, to like extract the pure story of the universe in a way. I don't know, but it sounds to me like what would we be doing with the information of a unified theory, if not telling the story? And so, for you to build a platform that may increasingly become more sophisticated in the future, wherein it's not just that someone is telling you through an interaction over 30 minutes what's happening,
Yep.
but that actually creates almost like a movie or something
Yeah.
that people could like experience in the
And
future. I don't know.
that
So
was actually something that I plan on doing. Like, I am, it's not going to go on, rather, this particular narrative project is not going to go on forever
yeah.
because I don't actually enjoy the illustration all that much. It's a very tedious process at the moment. But once that's done, I do plan on either, cementing it into something of a movie or a film for more people to experience, or to actually make it into some sort of interactive game. I have no idea how that would work, but those are my options at the moment. That's where I stand. And after that, that's when I'll probably actually look into the proposal that you've offered me to start teaching some of these ideas. But that's years away.
Okay. Well. Okay. So what we had discussed about that was because now we're getting a bit more into the details. The how someone would make a story with you from what we had discussed, the technology in a way. It seemed to me like you would have to train people on those virtues that we were discussing in order for them to be able to participate in this world building scenario or history that you want to tell, like
Sure.
story. So to get into those virtues, and see, the thing that you want to teach is not just applicable to helping people or helping you create your world and your story, but it's applicable to me. It is applicable to everything. Like, you can apply it to your job, decision making in your personal life, different fields in science, in the sciences, and in the arts, in everything virtually. So, can you go a little bit more into detail and reiterate what those virtues are, what that technology is, what it is that you would want to teach as a basis for one, your project, and two, the technology that I'm also building?
Okay. Let's see. So the particular thing I would be trying to teach in this sense would be mainly the power of narrative. And the difference between narrative and story is that story is told and narrative is lived and embodied. Narrative is what guides everyone and everything, I think. And there are elements of narrative that can be taught so that people can direct their own narrative and thus, by proxy, conduct their own behavior. And the I believe there were, yeah, no, definitely nine different measures within the concept of narrative, specifically when it comes to the individual. To start off with the measures of a being, which is the physical, the identity, the person in and of themselves. It would be strength, elegance, and quality. Strength would be their general intensity, their heft and weight in this world, in more individual sense. Strength. Elegance would be the comparison um, between different sets of quality. When one looks at someone with high elegance, they are more often than not preferred over something else. It would be like measuring the other mm, the other measures uh, that an individual has over other ones, which would make them more preferable and thus more elegant. And quality would be the amount of imperfections that they may have, or the individual may have, upon their individual form, and whether or not they can be removed or things of that nature. It is general purity. We go on to the measures of the individual's actions, which is the logical sphere of things. often coinciding with morality and, obviously action. There would be whimsy, repetition, yes, and coherence. Whimsy is the general degree of splitting off into new paths, really. How often it happens, well, not, yes, rapidity, but also generally speed and fastness at which this occurs. It's like, how often are people like splitting off and diverting into a bunch of other paths in a hyper
Mm,
chaotic sort of way. And then coherence would be the capacity to it's a measure of sensibility and correctness in the most general sense imaginable. Um, and that is mostly coinciding with um, criticizing and principles and setting things to be correct in a
mm,
very verifiable sense. And then you have repetition, which is pretty, obvious, but it kind of coincides with integrity and discipline and, generally speaking, morality, set things that do not change. It is code.
mm,
Um, and then we go into the last set, which is the individual's degree of relation. That is, I describe to be tonal, emotional, affective. So the three here would be symmetry, affinity, and clarity. Symmetry is, mirrored affection, mirrored behaviors, talking to other people and having them respond in kind, reciprocate, generally reflecting the interactions that you may have between one another, uh, encouraging sociable agreeableness generally. Um, then we have affinity, which is baseline emotional desire. That would be the best way that I could describe it.
mm,
Um, Desire is, in this sense, rather affinity, that is usually just one way, and it does not tend to be reciprocated unless the other individual does indeed reciprocate it, which it would then be mutual affinity. Um, Generally speaking, though, affinity is directed towards something, and it is strictly derived from the individual. It outflows from the individual. And clarity is basically the quality of the relationship itself. If I could imagine a relation, it would just be a bond between one person and another. There's a bond between these two things,
mm.
and clarity
That's-
would be the amount of things between these two things. So it's like there would be a barrier here, 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 and here. Clarity would be a matter of identifying what is in the way between you and another person. And if there is nothing in the way, then you two are basically unified and congealed together in the most basic sense imaginable when it comes to relations. And that's all of those. I
Can I, so just so I can start to render something a little bit more concrete out of this abstraction,
Sure.
to reiterate, you've just outlined a number of categories of, let's say, virtues, or maybe to be more precise, I was thinking about calling them mechanisms and or abilities, and their effects or the actions that they produce, um, as well as the interrelationships between those, and of one person and another, like two nodes, let's say.
Yep.
So so you've outlined that within a few categories and then subsets within those categories. So that, um, ultimately seems to me like you're extending, let's say, the study of intelligence, or agency in a way. So you've sort of given a very rigid, concrete, visible structure to manifestation, creation,
Yep.
that emerges out of the human mind and body at the same time,
Yep.
and then giving it a powerful framework that allows people to operate, to create stories. So to me, although it might seem abstract, even the way that I just put it, it seems to me like you're really going for something extremely concrete. I don't know what it would be for, but it seems to me like whatever it is that you're creating, it would lead towards some kind of singularity, or at least allow human minds to continue forward or to use their agency to create purpose and meaning in a post singularity world somehow,
Yeah.
um, or maybe before we lead, or like that would lead us to that, maybe, because I don't know if humans are still going to be humans after we've all sort of interconnected. I don't know. This is the part that's so kind of difficult to understand. Like, who knows what it is that we're talking about right now and what we're creating, and yet we still have this intuition that, this is leading to something. So you see what I'm trying to do here? I'm trying to draw a line between the abstraction and some kind of concrete direction. Um, so to me, this sounds like a technology. It is a
Yeah.
technology, right? And at the base of that, I would say awareness is required. That is the main ingredient or function that is required. Like, you must place awareness on each and every one of these categories in order to practice them, or to be aware of your personal levels, like how would you rate them, right? Like, for example, in affinity, how would you rate someone's ability to? It seems to me like you'd have to construct some kind of device, some kind of system or test that would allow us to understand like levels of
Yep.
these levels, right? Like, how much affinity do I have, and how do you compare that to other people, right? Like, how much data would you need from the world to be able to create like a on 100% scale or whatever? Do you know what I'm
Yep.
talking about?
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Um, all of those categories, those measures, are uh, just extensions of my psychological archetypes, and people do have the capacity to be more aware of some over others, and some are abysmal with some, but excellent with others, and that's where their general strength comes from. Yeah,
Mhm.
and those can definitely be observed and probably can be measured. I have no way of knowing, but
Okay, what
yeah,
if it doesn't matter? What if you have the ability to recognize who has like the strongest, whoever you can find anyway, that has the strongest ability in one category, and then you're trying to collect like the people, the team of the people who have like the strongest in every category. Like, you want to find one person that has, the strongest affinity, one that has the strongest. What did you say in
uh,
the other? I don't know,
clarity,
clarity, and in the other
symmetry,
ones,
etc. Yeah,
symmetry and so on. So like, and then to see what were to happen if we really optimize and just get the cream of the crop within these kind of human abilities, this consciousness, this ability for human consciousness. If we create a story or a simulation of what would happen, what kind of reality would emerge from that? Is that what the goal is? Like, the people you said you want to select, you said like 10 to 12 people or something?
With that, it would just be to have everyone have a taste of what it's like to be a part of every single one of those categories. Some will probably pick, maybe not over the span of 9 chapters. They'll probably not pick each one at a time individually. Some might double back on a few. Doesn't
Yes.
really matter. But the goal of teaching this would be specifically for some degree of self improvement, self awareness, knowing what to be aware of. As it stands right now, it's mostly for myself. I'm trying to see and test whether or not some of these things are applicable, if the language needs to be changed. I tend to experiment on myself when it comes to a lot of my own mental constructions.
Okay. So I'm trying to like zoom back out now a little bit. We've gotten into some very specific things about your worldview, and then like how it, like the projects that you're working on and everything. So to zoom back out, let's say that now you have a sort of a practical framework, something that is on like the sharp end, that is like the tool or the actions that would be taken, or like a vehicle for whatever it is that we were going to reach, like unified theory. And because it seems to me like we're starting to blur the lines between the theoretical and the practical, because like not only are we trying to describe reality, but we're trying to extract from it some kind of utility. I would imagine that's the two kind of go hand in hand. Excuse me, because like if we look into what a lot of people talk about in this kind of community, we're really going across so many levels, so many domains. Um, and I would say that this is one of the few conversations that I've had, if not the only one, that seems to be quite unique, because now we're not just trying to describe and understand how to conceptualize reality and how to unify everything. We're talking about something more practical, like what to do with that, and how, and perhaps the it is necessary to create some kind of practical vehicle in order to create a unified theory, not just find one or extract one from observation, but to create a unified theory through action. And so that's why I'm interested in building a technology personally, and why you might be interested in doing that through like a storytelling based and like psychology based manner. Um, so the value. So now we're starting to zoom back out again, and so uh, is the reason that you're taking part of this community is because you see a lot of, let's say, data sets that you can extract from for your theory. And do you think that at the end of your project, kind of like Tyler Goldstein, he has a real experiment, scientific experiment that he wants to run, um, and perhaps that's what's going to, I don't know, launch the singularity, or bring the world together. I don't know what it is, but do you believe that at the end of your story, the first few stories, like, will it never end, or that it will somehow create a singularity, or you know
Hmm. I well, my concept of singularity is inevitable. It's going to happen way off in the distant future, and that's usually where my eyes are set when it comes to any form of singularity. I mean, if one is speaking of a technological one, then I don't know. I'm skeptical that such a thing is feasible, especially within the next century. What I see happening in the next century is uh, a radicalization of what's going on right now in all aspects, but not much of a singularity. There will be a breaking point and there will be a mending point. I'm not sure what those would look like, but yeah. Um, when it comes to my own work, I only think in terms of my own lifespan, or at least decades ahead. I know what I'm going to be doing with my work, but I don't exactly know what the byproducts of it will be. I'm just kind of riding the line on that aspect.
okay. um, what's it all about then, man? What's the purpose of everything you're doing and this community and humanity in general?
Right.
Can you give us a little bit more
Yeah, the community.
views on that?
In that sense, the reason I'm in the community is to mainly test my ideas.
Mhm.
I don't really need to gather information and observe people all that much anymore. That's definitely more of a fun pastime than anything else now. But yeah, no, I'm there in the community to poke at ideas, help further them towards the direction that they seem to naturally be going in, and seeing what becomes of that, if anything at all.
That's what I was thinking. Like, because you're looking at things from a psychological point of view, it does add some kind of special ingredient to the community, because you have like people who are psychological. Well, no, sorry, they're scientific. They're physics based. Some have a bit of information into biology. Some people bring a religious point of view, a historical point of view, political, and so on. And so, not too many people have gone about this in a psychological point of view, but even less a psychological view of the kinds of thought patterns that emerge out of people who create theories of everything. That's what I find kind of interesting. And so you are helpful. This is why I think Daniel and I were quite attracted to your work. And I know Daniel did literally um, directly benefit from your work. I think he hired you for some critiques and analysis of his work and so on, and he seemed to have benefited from that. And you also design. You're a designer, so you can quite literally bring a physical, or you can bring imagery to the thing,
Oh yeah.
to abstract ideas, which is quite useful as well. So that's one of the things I wish I probably should have mentioned earlier, at the beginning of this chat. But if anyone got this far, that's ultimately what I want to make known to people a little bit, that you exist and you're in that community, and that's what your talent is. And yeah, I don't know. Aside from that, I am curious. Just I want to know what else you would want to add. What you feel that you need to express.
I do not think there's much more I need to say.
Mhm. That's another thing I've noticed about you. You're incredibly insightful, but you're also extremely efficient. There isn't too much, let's say, thinking out loud. You
Yeah.
know,
I do that in whenever I'm, private and not being absurd. I don't need people to see that on camera. That is messy. But
yeah,
yep.
yeah. Whereas I'm the opposite. Yeah, I think out loud and I try to work off of other people's ideas and see where that leads. Um, I still want to know more, to be honest. Like,
There's always time.
because yeah, that's true. That is true. But I'm trying to find a really relevant. Perhaps because it's like a challenge to me, because you are so uh, cut and dried, and I like that. But at the same time, I'm curious because you do seem to have an answer for a lot of things. Like you said, your thought processes are private, and because you've come up with some answers that are really detailed and highly precise out of everything I've asked so far, it leads me to wondering, yeah, how many questions could I ask before you've exhausted um, the thoughts that you have, and then you could just say, "Well, I haven't thought about that, so I have no answer for you." Um,
I mean, it would have to be like hyper specific. It's like, oh, what's the what are the proteins in a cell or something like that? I
yeah,
don't know, man.
no, I feel you. No, here's one. What are your motivations? What would you like to see? What kind of relationships do you want to have in this community with people?
What do I want to see? I mainly want to see where this goes, where the community goes. I'm at the moment a little uncertain about where it is actually going. It's definitely a place where people can, gather because the main motivator for people joining is because they tend to not really have many people to talk to about their own revelations and their own ideas and their deep interests in metaphysics and philosophy and all of the other relevant fields that are in that server, and that in its sense brings it all together for a lot of people. Um, and the best I could ever hope for is for that to continue because people do need those outlets because I know how it feels to be completely alone when it comes to not having anyone to talk to with in regards to these topics. Yeah. There was another question. I'm blanking out on what it was.
Well, yeah, I kind of want to know that one mainly anyway. Like, what kind of relationships do you want to have? Well,
Ah,
but
um,
that's what you basically described. The
yeah,
ability to share.
yeah,
But
just yeah. That's why the community is there for me too,
mm,
just to relate whenever I feel the need to do so. And that's good
yeah.
because there are very few spaces where that is encouraged, right?
Yeah, so I'm going to get a bit abstract, but I'm curious how concrete you can make this. I am curious about the direction of the community as well. That there seems to be a wide gap between a lot of what people discuss. Sometimes they intermingle a little bit, But you know, yeah, I have some community members in my mind, and I'm like, okay, yeah, they usually deal with this kind of topic. Sometimes it doesn't seem very relevant to like. There's like different threads, and I'm curious, like so far there's a few of us like that are starting to do interviews like this, right? Like I never thought I'd be doing these kinds of interviews. Not like memes of destruction is big on that now.
Yeah.
Daniel started doing interviews. I'm starting to do interviews, and these are were people that never thought about connecting to other people in this format before. And I'm curious, like, do you think that over time, if enough of us do interviews between each other and watch each other's interviews, that somehow these disparate gaps are going to start to form and come together, and then we will see a direction for this community?
Hmm. The way these things tend to work from my own observation and from running my own community of sorts, which is not entirely related to the theory of everything community, but it did have philosophical elements to it. That's just how I am. But it tends to create, rather, the main community tends to splinter off, and then those splinters tend to commingle a little bit before eventually evaporating and then returning back into the community. Uh, it's a pattern I've seen a lot, and I don't think it's quite doing it in, well, actually, no, I say that there are a number of communities that I popped in and out of that stemmed from the theory of everything community, but yeah, that's typically what I see. In order for it to be different, I'm not too sure. Interviews do help. That's definitely a different thing that I have not seen before. And it makes me think that there would be, I mean, attempts at organization uh, makes it almost inevitable for it to fall apart, or rather, organizing, a splinter community of sorts. It almost always tends to fall apart based on history. But if it remains kind of decentralized, it won't really, it won't have anything to, evaporate. There won't be a community. It would just be people getting together. Usually, the people with the largest ideas or the highest degree of interest in other people's ideas. They will. They learn more. They gain something out of the interaction, and they're inclined to do more interactions like that. And that can, potentially spur other people to get their voices heard eventually. Yeah. So I can see that working out in that sort of way. I don't quite know how that's going to impact the main big community unless you get a lot of people involved in that too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think it's the people who consume the most ideas and render more things compatible that will eventually emerge as creating the theory of everything that will be most widely accepted, or that it will be like done in another way? Because that seems to be.
Hmm. I mean, the way I see it, and based on my own um, uh, methods in bringing things together, yeah, I do think that the ones that are actively trying to assimilate all of this information and any information at all into something complete and coherent will be the ones that create something of a complete theory. Though I will add a bit of a caveat there because a theory will never truly be complete. It'll only be complete as their own set of information has, right? The individual cannot know anything that they have not experienced before, and the only complete theory would be the world itself. And no person can fit the entire world in their heads, but uh, in terms of practicality and usability, yeah, the people that learn the most and integrate it all and bring it all together into something cohesive for themselves to use, for the individual to use, those are the ones that will be of the greatest degree of value in that sense.
Yeah, so in a way, we could maybe define the theory of everything as something that has to do with like the greatest theory that is possible
Yeah.
for a human being to put together. But do you think it would be one human being?
Hmm. It would honestly be many, and the theory would take shape, based on the person's individual biases and their own individuality in general. And it would be expressed in very similar ways, but of course, due to everyone's own idiosyncrasies, they would be, you know, different. But ultimately, saying the exact same thing, having well, not the exact same thing, but very similar things, very similar sets of content, things of that nature. Yeah.
Mhm. Um, yeah, because it seems to me like for that to happen, for all of that to happen, it would require the mending of one massive rift. Sure,
Yep.
there's lots of different levels, psychology, politics, and all that, but the translation or the alignment of all those levels, I don't think is the issue. The issue is the rift at the very metaphysical level, and the rift is the material reductionists versus the consciousness based, folks. And it seems to me like that those are people going in two opposite directions. It's like perfectly mutually opposed.
Yep.
And unless someone can find a way to like bring them back around, or make them face each other somehow, or have one accept or assimilate the other, I don't see how this community can go on much longer, and that eventually will fractionate into two communities. Um, and perhaps it does require two types of theories. One that is material reductionist based, and one that is consciousness based, and then you can try to come along and see like which one couches in the other one, or can we make them compatible somehow. And this is why I believe my theory is quite powerful. Paradoxism is because that's precisely what it attempts to do. In my opinion, I think it successfully does. um, so like the to me, like me personally, from what I am experiencing, is I believe that what Roy, Daniel, and I have come up with is a vehicle for a theory of everything. So like unity theory is not complete, but it acts in such a way that people can plug in their level of expertise and then go off into infinity on each level and continue getting more and more sophisticated and more detailed, higher resolution. And so to me, a theory of everything would not finish developing, which is why it has to be an engine. It has to be like a technology in a way. Uh, and so I think over a long enough time span, people would look back and start to realize this is the theory of everything. It will not be like announced one day, everyone's like, oh my God. I think it'll be like a process that in hindsight, people will just kind of realize that that's what it is. For example, like social media wasn't like overnight, but at the same time, everyone accepts it now. Like no one kind of like questions what is social media. People just use it. So I
Yeah.
think I think I think that's what is pretty much occurring at this moment in time. And so, if I were to bring this to a close, a little bit, insofar as the relationship between you and I, as the last topic,
Sure.
is I would say that what I was interested in is that when I started seeing, like, what's interesting to me about this community is that especially Kurt Jaimungal, who said that he wants to bring folks together and see if out of that people can start to work together, and that will create the unity theory. And so far, I only see that happening with the Discord. I don't see too many. Like, he is starting to do that with like these established academics. They're starting to do like talks together a little bit, but these academics are really highly developed to their own theories, and they're just so high value and very complete in their own ways. I don't see how anyone's just going to come and just like render those compatible. And I don't even know if it's possible to render a theory compatible when it's too highly detailed, because then all you see are the details. So if I were to guess, I would say that this theory of everything is going to emerge in this like non-academic, or this more like organic soup of people that is the Discord chat on the Toll server. Um, and so that's what I start to recognize when I see members come together, and that's when I saw Daniel and Roy, and I was just like, okay, our three theories ultimately are like three major puzzle pieces that can fit together. And then when you came along and you started helping us optimize our ideas, but then you also have this engine or this idea that like it's more the practical side. Like, okay, once we have conceptualized the theory of everything as a framework, what would be the practical or the utility that would come from it, and how would you achieve utility? It seems to me like the world is increasingly going in the direction of what you're building, like storytelling system. So, for now, I think the unification theory is an assimilation, and the beauty of it is it's not like there's one theory. It's is the unity theory seems to always be greater than the sum of its parts. So like paradoxism rendering JCT and non-conceptuality compatible, and then something like you coming along and making use of that, like that gives like a basis of truth or a foundation off of which something can move forward, and like a practical application can be derived. Who knows, that could continue in many different levels. Biologists, archaeologists, everyone on every level. I don't know if you saw our triune video. I made a video about the triune system and the chart. So every level that all these people seem to be discussing, either just on that level or multiple levels and how they relate to each other. Like Tyler Goldstein, he calls them castes. Daniel's JCT, he refers to them as levels. There's a couple others that have that similar kind of theory where they observe just the evolution in the physical world. Ultimately, these levels, these things, each and every one of them, I believe, wouldn't necessarily have to apply the technology. So like you're talking about creating a story. Well, what if the physicists could come together and build stories upon stories, infinitely so, that are like simulations to see the different possibilities? So like Roy discusses in his theory how like the world is generated. So like, if you want to understand reality, just like you need to come back to awareness and realize that this is never going to stop. So, and I've just come along and said, okay, yeah, you would prefer the world to just sit between two thoughts and like, the world will go away. But the fact is the world isn't going away. And I think it is and isn't at the same time. That's where my paradox comes in. But ultimately on the other side, you have Daniel who's describing the levels. But then like, like what do you do with that? So potentially this is all to culminate into this statement, which I believe that so far, the way I look at it is our four theories, or the four of us and what we're working on, they all fit one inside of the other. And out of that emerges unity theory. It's not like I have unity theory or that you have, they're like, it's together. They're like, it's an emergent phenomenon. And that's how infinity works, right? Like, there's always one thing being created after the other forever. So unity theory is not any one person's theory. It's us coming together like this, incompatible, and seeing like, how does it all fit together? This is why I was trying to create the think tank on the Unity Theory website. And if you go to the front page, in fact, what it is three websites at the bottom where you'll see the three theories. And in fact, Unity Theory itself is a theory, because like the way I describe it is I realized that there are four types of theories. One is a purely metaphysical theory, right? Non-conceptuality, that would be Roy. One is a physics-based theory, that would be how reality develops and emerges. That would be jumping continuity theory. And then you need one that renders those two compatible, because people are always wondering, well, is it just the physical world, or is it just the metaphysical world, or is it both somehow, or is it compatible? And if so, how? That's what paradoxism does. But then you have to understand, like, you have to understand all that. Like the system itself if we can see it in these three sort of like facets: physical world, pure non-physical, like just nothingness in a way, the way Roy describes it anyway, and then something that renders that compatible with the human mind, like it's like an interface. And then at self-description, like the fact that I described reality as something paradoxical, that Daniel has described reality as like a spiral of things that are emerging infinitely, and that Roy has described it as like a pure consciousness that is just playing a game, and that really there's just pure potential, a superposition of like the world and nothingness at the same time. That itself needs a self-description, and that's the fourth theory. That's what unity theory is. So then that's why I was just like, hey, well, when you came along, I was like, bang, like that is how we would like basically like not propagate, but that is the mechanism, that is the last puzzle piece that would just get perhaps everyone to come on board. Like you said, you're looking for like 12 people. Here's what I would do. I would apply your history making kind of mechanism, your world building mechanism. I would apply that to every level in Daniel's spiral. And what Roy and I talk about are really just giving a foundation of like the truth in a way, like defining what truth is, so that people can actually have a consensus and say, yeah, now we can all play a part in this unity theory, this like ongoing world creating thing. So like if we can find that essential ingredient of truth and find a way to apply that truth and multiply it exponentially, so it's a different truths, different worlds, different constructions forever. We're basically playing the game that Roy wants everyone to stop. But at the same time, the beauty of it is that that same technology would allow people to stop playing the games, whoever wants to stop playing it. So it's like God is doing both at the same time. The Hindu version of that would be like Shiva. Shiva, I think Krishna and Brahma. I'm not sure actually, but there's three Hindu gods, and one represents balance between things. I believe that's Vishnu. Uh, and then there's Shiva, which is the destroyer of worlds, and there's Brahma, which is the creator of the world. So to me, the creation and destruction and balance between the two, right, is ultimately uh, what's happening. So that's why Roy disagrees with what we're doing, because he's like just and and I think Daniel doesn't disagree with Roy, but he's not interested in stopping the game the way Roy says. And I'm just there saying like both are what's happening, and here's how they're compatible. So yeah, now I'm starting to think out loud, and it's turning into like a thinking session anyway. But the point is, I can see something emerging. I don't know if you agree or if you disagree, and yeah, I'd like your opinion on that before we go.
When I first took a look into the Unity theory, I found it odd how they were all fitting together. I could see very clearly how they were, and they were like kind of attached together by their very ends, really, and they were all allowed to be their own thing without really stepping on each other's toes, really.
Mm.
When it comes to making constructions, I tend to be extremely particular about how it's done, and the general aesthetics of it made me go, I don't know if these are really fitting together, though. It seems like everyone's just kind of in their own camp, and they're, again, just attached to each other by their own ends. And it's very obviously a collaborative project, so maybe something could come of it. But yeah, I mean, generally, it's like, yeah, I mean, there's no reason why they can't fit together, I suppose.
Yeah,
I'm,
sorry to just cut you off, but
yeah,
I agree with what you're saying. Like because reality is inherently as sort of outpouring in every direction. Like everyone will continue creating their own directions, but they all need to start like to. I don't know if they need to, but it seems like people are pushing for just precisely that the beginning is all pointing to one thing, and so that it almost gives certainty or energy or motivation to keep going in your direction. So like that's what I was thinking. Like your mechanism could be applied on every level of the spiral of in Daniel's theory, right? Like so, like physicists biologists, chemists, whatever, psychologists, and so on, if you were to apply, like teach them those virtues that you were talking about, and then help them like create simulation. To me, the way I see it is a simulation. You're helping them apply, let's say, those kinds of virtues to their fields. How can you apply symmetry to chemistry in a way, and every other thing you had mentioned? If there's one technology or one kind of way to simulate on every level, I think that's how we would maintain, or that's how singularity would happen. Now, I don't have the desire to create singularity, but it seems to me like that's just what is, like, reality is ingrained and has something in it, intrinsically in it, that does that, that creates these like greater and greater levels of interconnectedness and high resolution, like detailed constructions.
Yeah.
So that's why it's kind of ironic how there's one thing that is incredibly simple that can seems to distribute itself throughout, and not just distribute itself, create a whole reality, create all these constructions, and distribute itself throughout it infinitely. And that's why I was saying, like, awareness, literally awareness, where the only axis of freedom that we have, being able to point your awareness on one thing or another. You came along and said, here are these things for the human being anyway, all these like virtues. And then if we could find a way to apply that and have these biologists and chemists and physicists and psychologists and artists and historians and whatever, and individuals, if they could all apply it in their own worlds, in their own way, in their own fields, and create simulations, right? And see what kind of technologies or what kind of constructions, what kind of artwork, what kind of whatever. It seems to me like all of these constructions, everything that would emerge from all of these people would somehow fit together and be like, and reflects some kind of perfect beauty or love, like you said, everyone experiencing love from everyone at the same time.
Yeah. And I mean,
Does that, am I giving you a bit more of a visualization? Does that start to kind of make things coherent?
yeah, I mean, what you're describing is that basically we would be recreating the world in all of its majesty, in from literally from the ground of our own set of contexts, really. Yeah.
Yeah. So, like, so far, I haven't heard anyone talking about what I'm talking about right now on this level. Uh, like, not really talking about it, because I have heard everyone talking about it, but from different ways. And
Yep.
I'm just contextualizing. Like, I'm sort of creating some kind of direction. Um, so maybe that's just what I'm doing, what I want to do, and it really isn't what's going to happen. But it seems to me like there has to be one person or a group or something that's going to always come along and draw a larger circle. So maybe someone will come, like, after I've just said everything, maybe someone will watch this and come along and say, that's great, you guys have all of this, I have the larger piece, the larger context, or the motivating, like, mechanical component that you need. And people can just continue adding on. I don't know, but yeah, that's basically, I've exhausted what it is that I wanted to express.
Yeah.
If you have anything else, agreements, disagreements, or comments.
There was one comment when you were describing the concept of singularity and how it's uh, you know baked into how everything seems to progress. And I was like, yeah, just about every single thing that exists now is some form of convergence, and it would make sense if history also converges in its own sort of way. Yeah, like all events are very much the product of convergence. Yeah.
Convergence is, it seems to be what everyone's talking about all the time in the simplest fashion. Yeah, you're right. And that's why when you were talking about your mechanism or your story telling sort of thing, that you said that it ultimately, it's a story that begins with, let's say, mathematics or some kind of metaphysical assumption, and then it ends up going back to that. Um, like it's so reminiscent of many things like cycles, and in Hinduism the idea of you know samsara. I don't know. I think it's Buddhist, but actually, is it Hindu? I keep forgetting now because there's like a bit of a mixture between
Yeah,
Buddhism and Hinduism.
exactly. I always get it mixed.
Yeah, but they also believe in like there's time. There's like there's ages, right? Kali Yuga, for example, age,
Yep.
like the Vedic age and all that. So like this like big bang, and then it just like big crunch, big bang, big crunch, and so like yeah, I'm really at the skin of my teeth now with trying to exhaust all the, the things we can express. Uh, and I didn't want it to turn into that exactly like a session, but that's what's beautiful about coming together, right? Like and having this in a public manner because I think it's necessary. Um, Brandon, I want to thank you for your time. Everything you've discussed. Again, I think it created the catalyst for everything that I'm talking about. That's why I got into describing everything that I just did because I think that if this community were to need anything, it would be these kinds of conversations.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Um, and also, you had said like, yeah, you're done with everything you have to say. So, but
Yep.
I'm always that's why I'm always trying to extract things from you. Like, hey, I just said all this shit.
Everyone tries.
Yeah,
They can get a little bit more after every question.
I wonder how frustrated your partner must be.
She has her moments.
Yeah, that's good, man. Yeah, hopefully let's do this again sometime where we could get into discussing maybe other people's theories because that's what you're specializing in, seeing people's patterns and maybe talking more about the community, talking more about other things. And hopefully this will have kind of served like a bit of a publicity or motivation for some people to be curious enough to try to join our thing or movement in some way because yeah, that's something too we need to talk about in private later, but to let people know we did talk about you playing a big role in Unity theory technology, or maybe that Unity theory technology will just adopt what you're working on because you're already like way ahead and it's more sophisticated. Either way, will there be something that merges there? I don't know, but I think people who want to work on the practical side of things, who are maybe from like they're biologists or chemists, and they want to like, and they understand to some degree what we're talking about, and they're participating in the theories of everything unification type goal, that it would be cool to have them on board and study these theories and see what they can bring to the table, and maybe even be like perfect candidates for the project that you're talking about.
Yeah.
So that's it. Thanks a lot for your time, Brandon.
Yeah. Yours
Yeah,
as well.
just send me your links if anyone's interested in Nexumorphic. It's called
Yep.
Nexus.
Nexumorphic. Yep.
Nexumorphic, and your book Metaforma. Yeah, I'll put that in the description there.
Cool.
All right, till next time.
Till next time.